Good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me well, and I also hope that you'll be able to hear another Tom. There's two Toms, Father Tom and also Father Tom, and just fathers in a different ways. He will tell you a little bit more about himself, but I just want to say thank you for accepting my invitation to do this mission. During the parish and the diocesan sessions of the synod last year, one of the major things that was mentioned and brought back to us priests is that the married couples need some ministry, that they feel like they're after marriage, they're raising their children, they are going through different crises in their lives, and they are on their own with that. And I wanted to start providing care for the married couples with this year's Lenten mission. So that's why, knowing Tom and Lenna after a little bit since they have moved to the area, and knowing that they had a lot of experience of marriage preparation, I thought they would be good experts to provide for us this Lenten mission. So, Tom, take it over.
I don't know if this is working. Is this working? I've never used one of these before. I told Father I feel like I should have a cassock and then wrestle with it under the cassock because that's the only time I see these. Thank you for being here. As Father mentioned, my name's Tom Hockel, and this is my beautiful wife, Lenna, who's not here. My wife is supposed to be here. Unfortunately, she had shoulder surgery last week, and she's at home in a recliner on narcotics, completely passed out. So I'm solo tonight, which is completely ironic because the topic of the next few nights, of course, is what is Catholic marriage? What's it all about? And as you'll hear from me ad nauseum over and over for the next 3 nights, it's about union, it's about unity, and here I'm solo. So God has his sense of humor. But Lenna and I, we moved here, let me give you a little backstory to us. We started dating in high school, summer before our senior year in 1982, and went to college together, and after some time apart, got married and been married for 34 years coming up. We have 7 children, and our oldest, Blaze, is a parishioner here, and he is the headmaster out at John Paul II Catholic High School in Windsor. 3 years ago, when he became the headmaster, he was talking to his youngest sibling, our daughter. We had 6 sons and then a daughter. And he's saying, you really need to come out to my high school and finish high school out there. And his first reaction was, well, what do you mean? I live here in California in the Bay Area, and you're out there in Colorado. His wife's from Loveland, so they moved out here. That's how that happened. She's like, yeah, I don't think so. And then she, being her 14, 15-year-old self, whatever she was, 14, prayed about it and came to him and said, I really want to go to your school. And so she came to us and said, Mom, Dad, we need to move to Colorado. So we did. And it was the best decision ever. We end up here in Greeley in this amazing parish with the most wonderful, warmest people imaginable. I won't get into the cultural differences between the Bay Area and Colorado, and especially this part of Colorado. They are vastly different. But it will boil down to the people. I've found Coloradans, and in particular people from Greeley in this area, genuine and warm and friendly and inviting, and it's just been so refreshing. And so this has been a nice home, and it's been terrible to leave. But I was very thankful for Father Tomaj to invite us here and to be part of this. About 14 years ago, Lenna, my wife, and I had been independently thinking about getting into marriage preparation ministry. Neither one of us had talked about it. We didn't know that the other person was thinking about it. And then we got into a conversation, and it was like, you got to be kidding me. I was just thinking we should get into that. We should do it. And so we did 14 years ago, and we were trained in the Diocese of Oakland, California, and we have led marriage preparation retreats, both one-on-one with couples or in a setting over a weekend or 3 days with up to 60 people, 30 couples or so. We've done convalidations, which is when a couple's already married, but they weren't married in the church, and they want to become married in the church, and that takes a little bit of a different approach. And so we've done that for about 14 years, and we've gained tremendous insight and experience. I will say, and she would add on to this if she were here, we don't hold ourselves out as some sort of experts. We don't have degrees in marriage or anything like that. We have gained some wisdom, we've gained some understanding, we've gained some experience over the years of doing this and being with couples. We're standing on the precipice of matrimony and trying to convey to them what they're getting into. And so we have a working marriage that we think is doing pretty well. God's working in our marriage, and we've been able to share our experience and the church's vision, really, for marriage with those couples. We don't have a perfect marriage, but it's pretty good. And that's because God's involved, not because of us. You know, is anybody here not married? So everybody's married. So, all right. So everybody here's been engaged at one point. Fair to say? Engagement is that time, you remember, whether you've been married 5 or 50 years, you kind of remember back on that. You're on the precipice of this important decision. You're full of emotion. You're excited about it. You can't wait for it. You're enthralled with the other. This is your beloved who's before you, and you have this you just excited. You can't wait for it. They're laughing. You were just telling this story about moving out here from Nebraska, and they came out on their honeymoon, and you remember what that was like. It's an amazing time of life. But we have to, in a way, slow things down. Because engagement is a period of intense emotion and highs and everything like that. But in marriage prep, what we try to do is slow things down and think about what is engagement for. And we can do that even as married couples. Lenna and I do that all the time, even though we've been married 34 years. We still have to take things apart a little bit. Engagement is a period of discernment. And discerning comes from a Latin word to tear apart. You're dissecting things. Couples often come wanting to be married in the church, and they're not really sure why they're doing it. A lot of times they're doing it for different reasons they can't even put their fingers on. And so what we want to do is tear it apart a little bit and try to get them to think about what are we doing, why are we doing it, and in the end, we want to share with them the good news about marriage. Jesus came with the gospel. Jesus came with the good news. That isn't limited to anything in life. Jesus' good news about everything. Well, that applies to marriage as well. There is a good news that God wants to share with us about what marriage is. And we need to understand what that is so we can live it. The priest who married us, he said, marriage as a human institution is virtually impossible. That may be a bit of an overstatement, but not much. In my experience, it is virtually impossible unless you let God get involved in it. You could get across the Atlantic Ocean in a lot of different ways. You could go on a catamaran. You could go on a raft. You could probably even make it across the Atlantic Ocean in a bathtub, right? But the odds aren't very good. Odds are you're going to run into some trouble if you're in a bathtub going across the Atlantic. Wouldn't it be better to take a cruise ship? Wouldn't it be better, imagine this, if the being that designed the ocean and knew how to get across it best gave you a ship to get across it? Well, I look at marriage like that, and the Catholic marriage is the cruise ship that will get you across that ocean that is fraught with peril. You're much better off taking the cruise ship than the bathtub. And like everything else, God desires our holiness. He desires for us to be near Him, to be close to Him. Marriage is one of the ways that we do that, right? Holy orders is another way to do that. For married couples, what we're ultimately doing when we're getting married in the church is allowing God to take on our relationship to bring us, through one another, closer to Him. That's the goal. My mom used to tell us back in high school that your spouse is the way you get to heaven. That's not easy all the time, as you know. But your spouse is the way you're going to get to heaven. In marriage, we want to share that plan with engaged couples when we get together with them. So the plan for the mission tonight, we usually do this over a weekend, 3 days, and there's like 9 different sessions that we do. We begin with the family of origin, talking about the influence of our individual families on marriage and the attitudes we bring into marriage. We talk about the marriage and the culture around us. How does our culture view marriage? What lessons have we learned from our culture about it? Then we talk about things like communication in marriage. We get couples to dig deeper into issues maybe they haven't delved on. And then we deal with God's plan for marriage. How is that different from what the culture teaches us about it? The role of sex in marriage is a big topic that we get into. And then the sacrament of marriage. Tonight I'm going to kind of condense the first couple of those ideas, the family of origin and marriage and the culture around us. Tomorrow night we'll talk about God's plan for marriage, and then the third night we'll talk about sex and marriage and the sacrament of marriage. There is a plan to this. You might think, well, what does talking about our family of origin or marriage and the culture have to do with it? Marriage is a union. We'd all agree on that, right? It's a union. 2 people coming together. We even use language like getting hitched, right? Well, when we hitch something, we're joining them together. But any human association is a union of sorts. Think of the parish here. There's a union in the parish. What happens? All different people from different backgrounds come together for liturgy, right? Public worship, that sort of thing. There's a purpose behind it, a reason. If it was a baseball team, there'd be 9 people. They come together for a purpose. What's the purpose? To play baseball and win a game. They bring their respective talents to the field, and they try to win the game. Any human association is a union of sorts. Think of another one, a club, whatever it is, a bird-watching club. There's a purpose to it. You come together, you bring your interest in birds together, you watch birds, you talk about the birds, and you go on, you go home. Now, all of those different unions, whatever it is, think of any union of people that you can think of. They're limited in some way. They're limited to a purpose, right? And they're limited to usually an interest of some sort and a specific time, and then the individuals go their separate way. What we're going to talk about this week is that marriage is total union. It's a union unlike any other union. We don't come together just for a specified interest or purpose or time. I don't give to you just my interest in birds or my interest in baseball or my association with a parish. When we get married, what do we give? What do we give? We give ourselves. Our whole selves, our total selves. How do we do that exactly? What's the key to doing that? What's the thinking behind it? That's what we're going to be talking about. And because you're doing that between 2 people, and people aren't like disassociated spirits. We're people that come from specific backgrounds, specific families, specific experiences, specific cultures, even different ones. Whether it's in America and you come from a small town or a city, you have all this background, both from the culture and from your individual family experiences, and you're going to bring these 2 people together who are shaped by these things, and you're trying to form a total union between them. That's not an easy task. It's not an easy task. And sometimes we have to step back and think, do I need to unlock experiences that I've had, attitudes that I have, that are shaped by either my family of origin or my culture around me when it comes to marriage, in order to make my union more complete, in order to make it possible? The family of origin, I'll just start with talking about that for a minute. Let me see if I can get this projector working. Bear with me here. Family of origin. We've been trained about marriage by our family of origin and our culture. Everybody has a different family of origin. Think about it. Whether you're raised by a grandparent, a step-parent, two intact parents who have been married, whether you've had your mother or father pass away, whether there's divorce in your background, whatever it is, you've been raised by a certain group of people. And that group of people has shaped your attitudes about what marriage means. You've witnessed it. You've seen it over and over again. We're trained by those family of origin experiences toward a conclusion about what marriage is, what it looks like, how is it lived out. We're trained in terms of what we think about what love is. We adopt attitudes and behaviors on various issues. What does it mean to love someone? Where did you learn that first? Who showed it to you? Was it a good message? Was it a bad message? You may have grown up in a household where there's codependence going on, or substance issues, or things like that, and we learn all kinds of things about what love supposedly looks like. How is love lived out in a marriage? Things like our reasons for even getting married are influenced by our family of origin. In some cultures, it's a rite of passage. It's just that time to do it, right? You have family pressure at a certain stage. It's time to start having kids, or you do it for financial reasons. The mother chirping in the daughter's ear. It's time for my grandkids, that kind of thing. There's a pressure there sometimes that can be exerted by family members. Again, those are attitudes you start to develop, even subconsciously, about what we're doing when we get married. There's this idea of marriage as being, you're going to find the one who's going to complete you and fulfill you. I'm sure that we've all had that experience, or somebody said something like that to us. Someone's going to make me happy. We learn from our family of origin about things like our family roles. What does it mean to be a husband? What does it mean to be a wife, a woman, a man? What are we supposed to do? In my family, for example, my dad took the lead on things. He was, a very strong leader. He had defined roles. He'd go work. He'd earn the money. He'd come home. He'd have dinner with us. And then he'd go into his study and start studying stuff again. He worked very hard. Those are roles I saw. Those are things I saw about what it means to be a husband, right? Got that from my dad. If Lenna were here, and it kills me she's not, because I think one of the reasons it works with us, she had the exact opposite experience in almost every way from mine. Her dad died when she was 3. Mother married her stepfather, whom she didn't love. She married him for convenience, for need. They were poor, and she wanted to, marry somebody who had some money. And that's what happened. And she grew up miserable watching this relationship that was a marriage, right? It was a marriage, but they were completely disconnected. No connection whatsoever between them. When we're here together, I like to think of it as like watching a football game or something, and there's the play-by-play announcer, who calls I'm usually the play-by-play announcer in this talk, and Lenna is the color commentator. She comes in with the good stories, the funny things, she, gives the jokes. I can't do those, but I'm going to tell you some stuff about her tonight, and maybe I'll even tell you things I wouldn't say in front of her. No, that's not true. But, she had a very different experience about what it means to be a wife. Her mother was never there, was always working, was busy, Things like traditions. Think about this for example. In your family, you had experiences with different traditions, how you celebrate Thanksgiving or Christmas, what you do on birthdays. These things actually matter. They shape what family means to us. Again, for me, like Christmas, for example, in my family, it was the most special time of year ever. My parents did it so well. It was always exactly the same. It was the same amazing dinner on Christmas Eve. We'd have filet mignon on Christmas Eve. My mom would make these little meatballs. It was always the same thing, right? And I got this sense of security around Christmas because my parents did it like this. And we've chosen actually to do that in our family. We now do the same sorts of things. Lenna's family, it was a disaster. She had 3 sets of parents she was going back and forth to. She had stepbrothers. She'd go over there. She'd have maybe something to eat here. She'd go over to the next house. They never rested. They never did the same thing. So, she didn't experience those things the same way I did. So when we come into marriage, what do we do about that? Because she doesn't have the experience I do. In all of these examples, what we're striving for is unity, total unity. We have to unpack these things and make a decision about all of these things. Should I adopt this behavior, or should I maybe let it go and try to pick up some different behavior or experience? Because what you're doing is forming a union of 2 people with different. You're going to choose then which way you're going to go. Decision making is another good family of origin issue. How did you see decisions modeled in the marriage that you grew up around? Did dad always make the decisions? Did mom always make the decisions? Did they ever talk about it? When they did talk about it, was it strife? Was it conflict? Or did they, what did you witness? For me, my parents were very rational people. And they would sit, and I would listen to them. They'd talk back and forth, and it was always calm. For Lenna, she never had that at all, because it was just her mom, and her mom was like an old coffee percolator just sitting there, and you never knew what was bubbling under the surface, and then something just blew up and happened. So, going into marriage, guess what? That's something we had to deal with, because I wasn't used to that sort of way of making decisions, where somebody's just silent. I wanted to sit and chat and be rational and talk through and see all the options. She's not an option person. She's just a boom. So we had to unpack that. All of these things, you have 2 people with these different backgrounds coming together. Etiquette. My wife, she when we were dating, she'd come over to our house, and she'd come in, start doing her thing and whatever, and then time to leave, she'd just leave. And my parents were like, "What's up with Lenna? How come she doesn't say hello and goodbye?" Because in our family, it was you come in, you announce yourself like a sitcom on TV. "Hey, it's me," and you say hello to everybody, and then you do your thing, and when it's time to go, say goodbye. And a Hockel goodbye is like 25 minutes long, because you have to say goodbye to every single person, right? So different backgrounds. She didn't deal with that stuff. Did you go to the table and eat, for example? We sat down every night and ate at the table. You sat down, you said the blessing, you ate together, you asked to be excused. She didn't have that experience. She'd sit at home in front of a TV with a tray because her mom wasn't around, right? 2 people, different backgrounds, different experiences. How do you bring them together? Affection, showing affection toward one another. In your family, what did you see growing up? Did your parents show affection toward one another? How did it make you feel? For me, as a boy, I remember watching my mother and father hug or kiss or hold hands. They were affectionate with one another. And I remember how it made me feel. I get choked. I just thinking about it, I get choked up. I remember it made me feel so happy and warm and secure inside, right? Lenna didn't get to see that. She didn't get to see that. She went home and her mom was alone. Or when she got remarried, she was with this guy that she didn't want to touch. How does that affect a marriage? How do we manage those attitudes coming into marriage and form a union where people have diverse experiences like that? This one's a big one, finances. How are financial decisions made in your family? Do you even know? Did it just happen? Was there always financial security? Was there never financial security? Were you always worried about, whether you were going to get a meal? I never had any issues growing up. My dad was a dentist back when you could have one income, and he, bought their house when they were cheap, and think of that cheap housing in California. And, I never thought about it because I never had to worry. I never heard them worry about it. It was never an issue. Not Lenna. Guess what? Opposite. Single mother scraping by, trying to do what she can, to get her clothes. She'd have to go get, clothes out of the thrift stores, so Lenna could wear clothes. And now Lenna's great at thrifting, by the way. She can find anything in a thrift store. Anything you need, she can find it. But, different experiences. How about this one? Spiritual leadership. Was there any? Was it modeled to you? My dad taught us that, the father was the bishop of the household. So that gives you some idea of how he approached things, right? We'd kneel down every night. We'd say the rosary in the hall together. He would read us religious books at night. He wouldn't read us other things. He'd sit down and read us Bible stories. I watched my dad, as I was growing up, every morning go to the same chair in the living room. I'd get up for school, and he's in that chair praying, doing the liturgy of the hours, saying his rosary, whatever it was. And he's done that my whole life. Imagine what kind of effect that had on me, right? I saw this positive experience of spirituality, and I said, I want to be like that. Lenna? So this is a funny one. She didn't have anything modeled to her at all, but when she came into my family, she saw it and said, oh, I want that. I want that. She saw my parents interacting. She saw their marriage, a Catholic marriage, which she'd never really seen modeled anywhere. And she said, I want that. And that's part of the analysis in all of these things, is when you have two different people coming together to form this whole union, you have the power to choose how you're going to respond to things. Behavior is going to adopt or reject. Attitudes about drinking, smoking, gambling, drugs. That's a big one for a lot of couples getting married. And oftentimes they don't talk about this one. They don't even know how they've been influenced. My mom was an alcoholic. I had no idea she was an alcoholic because she never caused any problems for anybody as far as I saw. She was happy. She was always happy. So even though alcohol was an issue somewhere, it never affected me in a bad way. Lenna, no, you can guess. Not so much. But whatever it is, if you had this in your background, if you had experiences with marijuana or the other drugs where it affected people, you have to make a decision. What are we going to do about this in our marriage? What behavior are we going to adopt, or reject? This one's a good one. Conflict resolution. How did you see conflicts resolved growing up? Did your parents yell? Did they fight, throw things, hit each other? Did they sit down and talk about it? Did they never talk about it? Did somebody get the silent treatment and they just didn't talk to dad for 3 weeks? Until it blew over. For me, again, my parents, they'd sit down and just talk. They'd just sit and talk, and they'd work through stuff. And I thought, man, that looks easy. It's not easy. Guess what? It's really not easy. It's just words, right? You just sit down and move your lips, and these words come out, and things get resolved. No, it's not. That's not really true. Lenna didn't see any conflict resolution because it was just her mother. She did whatever she wanted to do, right? And there was no conflict. This is a big one, and it ties into the last one. Permanence of marriage. What did you see growing up in your family of origin with respect to the permanence of marriage? At the time we started marriage prep, the statistics showed that if both couples if neither couple had a divorce in their background from on their parents' level, the odds of them getting divorced themselves we're only around 20%, which is actually pretty low in the society at large. If one couple's parents had divorce in the background, that shot up to 50%. If both couples had divorce in the background, that shot up to 80%. There's only one explanation for that. Attitudes have been adopted about permanence in marriage, right? You've learned something about marriage that it's something you can get out of if things don't go as well as you wanted them to, right? And this was something I learned early on in our marriage. I think Lenna and I had been married about a month. We had our first fight. Who knows what it was about? Well, we were arguing about something or other. It got a little bit heated, and she just blurted out, "I guess you're going to want to divorce me now." And I was like, if this was a soundtrack, it'd be the screeching, halting tires, and I'm like, whoa, 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 or the ripping of the record player, I'm like, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Divorce? She's like, well, obviously, you don't want to be with me, and you don't love me, and honey, we're just having an argument. But we sat and we talked about this, and I unpacked her feelings, right? And what it came down to was a profound insecurity. Because in her experience, in her family, when you fought, it meant you're going to break up, even if you're married. For me, divorce was not even something you uttered in my family. I was taught from very early on that that's not part of the operating system in a marriage. You're in it to win it. You're in it for the long haul. So to me, I was secure in thinking we could have a fight and, we'll go beyond it and we'll get beyond it. But for her, that meant something very different. Very different attitudes about permanence of marriage. So we have to unpack that kind of thing. The good news about all this is that everyone has good and bad experiences from their family of origin. And no one is locked into repeating destructive behaviors or attitudes you learned. And part of the grace that we receive in the sacrament of matrimony is deciding and getting God's help in understanding who you are as a united couple. What's your vocation? What is God calling you to be? Irregardless of any of those experiences you had in your family of origin, what is God calling you to be in your marriage together? And God works through us to help us adopt the good behaviors, reject the bad behaviors. We're going to talk more about that when we talk about the sacrament of marriage and how that affects us. I got to get to the other PowerPoint here, Father. Let's see. Yep. Thanks. I think I got it. All right. So that's the family of origin. And I think you can see how that it would affect somebody. I think hopefully as you went through that, you're thinking about your own background, your own experiences. How have you dealt with that in your marriage? Can you recognize things among the items we just discussed where you said, we were two separate people with very different families of origin and experiences, and we had to reconcile those? If you've done that, congratulations. If you're still having trouble doing it, that's okay. Because marriage is always striving for greater unity. And we're going to talk later about ways we strengthen the unity despite all of those differences. But everybody in here, you're all married. This isn't an engaged couples thing, so it's a little different approach talking to you. You've all seen these differences, I guarantee you. Raise your hand if you've seen some differences in some of those areas. Everybody, right? Everybody, of course, because you're different people. The family of origin is one thing that shapes us in marriage. Another thing that shapes us is our culture. Our culture has a lot of great features. Think about, for example, some of our values, or at least things that used to be our values. I don't know if they still are. I think they're diminishing some ways. But there's a great emphasis in our culture on individual liberty, right? We talk about liberty a lot in this culture. It's in our Constitution. It's in our founding documents are all about liberty. And it's been pounded into our heads throughout our lives how important liberty is, freedom, right? We have a presumption of innocence. That's actually an important right. We have this idea that everybody starts from a place of being innocent. How does that shape us? We emphasize individual rights. Our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, is this list of rights that we have against our government. They can't do things. If we've been taught well at all as American citizens, we think that's important. We're a very industrious society. They used to call it the Protestant work ethic. That's a good thing, I think, in most cases. We roll up our sleeves, we get things done, we work hard, and hard work is rewarded. We have this thing called the American dream. All of these things shape our attitudes. And the culture around us, good or bad, affects us. The culture around us is the water we're swimming in, and we're the goldfish. You can't help but take things in, good and bad. Well, that's true of marriage and love as well. And I want to talk about 3 features of our culture where the water we're swimming in may not be so good. Marriage, love, and individualism. First, let's talk about our culture's view of marriage. Think about shows, movies, sitcoms. How is marriage portrayed? Is it good? Can you name a show where you've seen it, it's all about a couple's marriage that's really good? I can't. I can think of things like The Simpsons, where dad's a buffoon, right? And we have a lot of shows like that where dads are really buffoonish. You notice that? Women are harping and nagging people, and dads are idiots, right? And think of other shows like, or movies. How is marriage portrayed in things like The Notebook or fairy tales? Think about it for a second. We all grew up with Disney shows, fairy tales, right? It's always the same sort of theme, Somebody's a little disenchanted, not quite fulfilled, and then they meet Prince Charming, and you're swept away. There's even conflict with mom and dad about what you're supposed to be in life, and then you meet the guy, and all of a sudden, everything takes off and everything's perfect. Do you think that might shape our attitudes about marriage to some extent, to watch those things over and over again? I think they might. Think about shows or movies like The Notebook, or, there's tons of them. End of the Affair. Oh, I forgot to put that one up there. These movies tell us if you're unfulfilled in marriage and you come across that perfect person who sweeps you off your feet and makes you realize, that you suck the marrow of life out, and it's just, makes you fulfill all through and through to your very being, it's okay to run away with that person. It's okay to have an affair with that person. How many movies have you seen like that, with that message? There's a message behind that marriage means a certain feeling. Marriage means having a certain level of personal fulfillment. Those things shape our understanding of marriage. We can see the way our culture looks at marriage even in the way we talk about it, the way we joke about it. We say things like, the ball and chain, the fun's over. Think about bachelor parties for a second. Bachelor parties. I can't get over this one. You're about to enter into a commitment to somebody for the rest of your life that you're going to love like no one else on earth. And what better way to celebrate that than going to Vegas and getting drunk and hooking up with strippers? Isn't that a great idea, right? But how many movies do you see where that's what they do, that kind of attitude? Well, the attitude behind that is, you better get your fun in now because marriage is going to end it. You're going to be with one person the rest of your life, and that might not be so fun, right? That's the implicit message just behind that. Think about the reasons people give for getting married. It's just time to settle down, or my biological clock is ticking. I want to live happily ever after. That kind of attitude, they don't actually say that. But those are attitudes that are behind why I'm getting married. It teaches us something about culture. We see that same thing in a lot of movies and shows. Living together. Commonly accepted now. Why? Just widely. When we do couples retreats, and we have 60 engaged people there, probably 80% of them are living together now when we've done it. Probably about 80%. It's gone up over 14 years. And they don't really think anything of it. And yet here they are, they want to be prepared for marriage. There's a disconnect somewhere. And we are not going to do this here tonight, but after we go through some of the talks and we get through the sex talk and everything else, we challenge couples. Hey, what would you think about, not sleeping together or not living together for the duration of your engagement? Can you figure out a way to do that? And usually their lives are so intertwined, I don't have any place to stay, all my stuff's there, everything else. It's very difficult for them. But we challenge them to, because that's an attitude that's in the culture now that, we're going to live together to see if we're compatible. We're going to see if, it works between us. You're laughing at that. Why? It's stupid because you're going to take a snapshot of you at 22 or whatever, in this particular set of circumstances. You're going to say, I'm going to see if we're compatible in these circumstances. Well, how about when you have, 4 kids 15 years from now, and you got all these pressures and everything else, and you don't even think about the things you were thinking about when you're 22. Can you still judge whether you were compatible, based on that snapshot when you were living together? Of course you can't. It's a crazy mentality. It's a crazy mentality, and yet, it's everywhere. Think about the culture's attitude when we see it in the way people try to protect their rights even after marriage. Prenup agreements, for example. We're going to enter into a contract before we get married that's going to determine our rights after marriage, and should we break up. It contemplates in the background, of course, there might be a breakup. And if we do, here's how things are going to go down. And by the way, we're going to have separate names, separate bank accounts. We're going to take separate vacations. No joke. I had an associate, or a work associate some time ago, I don't know, probably 7, 8 years ago. We're chatting. So what are you doing this summer? Oh, yeah, I'm going to Spain for a couple weeks. Oh, that's awesome. When is you and Joe going? And she's like, no, just me. And I'm like, wait, you're going to leave? You're going on vacation without him for 2 weeks? Oh yeah, I'm taking off. I do my thing, he does his thing. We like it that way. Okay, they're divorced now. That's another story. But this separateness, we see a lot of that. I maintain my separate friends after marriage. They're kind of my thing. We do our thing together. You stay over there and I do my thing. We have all this my this and your that. That's saying something about marriage, and we learn that from the culture. I get it. I get why we do it. We're taught to do that. We can see our culture's attitude toward marriage in that it's often thought of as a conditional commitment. When people break up and get divorced, and I may include some of you in here. You may have had this experience. It just wasn't working out. That feeling. It just, I didn't feel fulfilled anymore. We've grown apart. I hear that all the time. I had a friend, very close friend, for 20 years. And one day he and his wife just told us they're divorcing. I said, what do you mean? What is going on? He said, yeah, we just don't feel it anymore. We've grown apart. We've grown apart. And that's accepted by our culture. The reality is that no-fault divorce, right, came along 40 years ago, crept in, and started creating an attitude about marriage that if it's not working for you, if it's not fulfilling you, if you don't feel a certain way anymore, you got an out. Is that Catholic marriage? Well, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that. Because Catholic marriage, unlike the marriage around us in the culture, has certain essential features. And we're going to examine those over the next 2 days. But think about also the attitudes that our culture tells us about love. What is love, according to our culture? It's often one of two things: sexual arousal, passion, or strong feelings of romance or closeness, right? That's usually what people mean when they say love, don't they? Every song is about that kind of thing. Sexual union or passion, or just intense closeness with someone else. A feeling, if you will. Deep feelings of romance. But the attitude that marriage, or that love is just a feeling, is pretty dangerous when you think about it. We see it in how we talk about love as an object. It's a something that we experience out there. The heart wants what the heart wants, as if the heart is telling us to go to it. It's something that happens to us even. We're passive. We can't even control it. We fall in love. We fall out of love. There was a song by this woman called Alicia Keys a while ago. I keep on falling in and out of love. It was the chorus in the song. And she said it about 100 times in the song, so she kept falling in and out of love throughout this whole song. Drove me kind of batty. But, that's the way we think of marriage. Lastly, I got to talk about this one. If love is a feeling, a deep sense of closeness for another person, or sexual passion for another person, there's no limiting factor to that. There's no limiting factor to that. I can love a bridge. And there was a woman in Germany who proclaimed she was marrying a bridge. There's this article here where, I think, her brother? Fell in love with her brother? No, son. Oh, sorry, the brother's another story. Fell in love with her son. And you know what? What's the attitude behind this? I have intense feelings of closeness toward this person. That means I love him or her. Therefore, we should get married. Why doesn't it make sense? I mean, if love is just about whatever you feel, that deep feeling of closeness, it does make sense on some crazy level. See, if love is that, if it's a thing that happens to us, and when it happens, it's going to be great. It's something that we feel, right? And we all felt that. This is Lenna and me when we were engaged, right? We all had that feeling of special closeness toward one another. But if that's what it is, you're living very dangerously. If that's all love is, you're living very dangerously, because it can change and it can be directed to a lot of different things. You might even, in the course of your marriage, come across somebody who makes you feel a certain way your wife or husband no longer makes you feel. By the culture's view of love, that means you should let it all go and be with that person. It's a very dangerous thing. Last thing I want to go over on this is our culture's views of individualism. Highly valued in our culture. We're trained, right, to be independent, self-reliant individuals. We're trained to think for ourselves, achieve our personal goals, fulfill ourselves by doing what's best for us. Isn't that true? It's my choice, it's my will, it's my life. Be all you can be. When we do that, when we're trained to think of our goals and ourselves and our ambitions first, that ultimately leads to the sin of pride. I'm focusing on me. not somebody else. In our culture, when we're trained to maximize our own happiness, our own pleasure, if it feels good, do it sort of mentality, that leads to the sin, the vice of sensuality. We're always in pursuit of fulfilling our own pleasure quotient. We're trained by our culture to do what makes us look good to other people, project an image so we can gain respect and influence and power and friendship. If we get into that, it leads to the vice of vanity. The world around us, the culture around us, if we adopt its values, we end up with pride, sensuality, and vanity. And ultimately, what it leads us to, an attitude of looking out for ourselves before and after marriage. We see ourselves as the priority, and when we bring that into marriage, we get trapped into something called married singles. Married singles is one of the biggest things we talk about in our preparation retreats. It's also something was big for Lenna and me in our experience doing this and helping us get a stronger marriage. Because everybody in here, I guarantee you, who's been married, at some period has fallen into, on some level, to the trap of married singles. What is it? It's an attitude. It's not a particular activity, it's an attitude. Married singles is a tendency to focus my individual interests, needs, wants, or activities, and putting my thing ahead of unity with my spouse. It makes the marital union secondary to something or someone else. This is key. This is key. If we're after total unity in our marriage, then we need to be asking ourselves in everything we do, every big decision, every little decision, every big behavior, every little behavior, is this harming my unity with my wife or my husband? Is this strengthening my unity with my wife or my husband? Is this building unity or is it destroying unity? Because if we live married singles, if we get into this attitude of putting my interests ahead of my unity with my spouse, really putting anything ahead of it, we fall into a trap. We fall into a big trap. And there are really 5 quick ways I'm going to go over where we see this. Letting my personal interests dominate my time and attention, how I spend my money, what I spend my thoughts on. Do I sit at home on, perusing Twitter or Facebook or Snapchat while my wife's sitting there lonely and I have no idea? Do I put the game, watching the game ahead of, maybe connecting with my wife? Do I really not put her interests at all ahead of anything I do? Number 2, relegating our time for each other, especially intimacy, to leftover time. We do this a lot. We schedule things. I've got so many things pulling at me. I got business. I've got kids' needs. I've got colleagues' needs. I've got financial stuff. I got all these things, and there's this thing called intimacy with my wife or my husband. I'll schedule that in at some point. I'll schedule, and maybe I'll even I'll put it on the calendar and I'll take you out later for when I don't have anything else to do. We can do it. 3, trying to change your spouse. We do this a lot, don't we? I'd love you a lot more if you just did this, or if you were just like that. Now look, some of that's okay, of course, because if somebody's got a bad behavior, you got to try to fix it and work it out. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is an attitude of, I'd like you better, if I made you in my image and likeness. If I could make my wife or my husband in my image and likeness, they'd be a lot more lovable. Guess what? They're not made in your image and likeness. They're their person, individual person. And a trick is to love them for all of the little peculiarities that they possess, even the crazy ones, even the ones that drive you crazy. And I'll tell you, it's taken me 34 years of marriage, but in the last 2 years, this one's hit home for me finally. The things that would drive me crazy about Lenna now have become something that make me feel warm inside, that I laugh about, that make me feel close to her, because it's just her. It's just, and that's where we, instead of this attitude is, I'm going to change her so she doesn't do this thing. Hold her fork a certain way that drives you nuts. I don't know. It could be any little thing. And you're like, if you just would stop doing that, if you just would not salt the food so much, whatever it is, there's little things. If you're looking at your wife or your husband, you're saying, I'm going to fix you so I like you better. You got a bad attitude. You got something wrong. And then in decisions, how are we making decisions? Do we live married singles and making decisions in marriage? Do I make things, decide them on my own? Do I talk to my wife or my husband about it? Do I open up? Do I risk that they're not going to approve of my way of doing things? Do I let them in? And even open myself up to a little bit of conflict over things? Or do I just do things? It could be little things like, how the house is decorated, right? It could be little things. Maybe that's a big thing. I don't know. Or it could be big things like, where are we going to live? Are we open to life? In our marriage, that kind of thing. Am I making those decisions on my own? Or am I seeking unity with my spouse first? Finally, do I reserve some private sphere of life that I don't let my wife or husband into? Is there a sphere of emotion or experience there that I don't open up about it? I don't talk about it. That's me. That's something I'm reserving. I put Gollum up there, my precious, my thing I'm going to guard, and nobody else is going to get it, right? Do I have that sphere of life where I don't let my husband or wife in? Do I have an emotional insecurity that I want them to see? Did I do something? Something that I feel I'm ashamed of and I won't talk to them about? You're probably leading a life of married singles because you're putting something ahead of your unity if you're doing that. When we lead married singles in marriage, it always leads to this: loneliness, isolation, disappointment, fear, and growing apart. If Lenna were here, she would tell you how she felt in periods in our marriage where she knew I was living married singles, putting my interests ahead of our unity, doing my own thing, and she would tell you how she felt. And that kills me, and no matter how many times I hear her talk about it, it kills me because I know I hurt her by leading married singles in some way. You stood on the altar. You took a vow to give yourself to this other person. You never foresaw yourself doing this to your husband or your wife, leading a single life where you don't really unify with her and you hurt her. You create loneliness. And you create separation. And you ultimately grow apart if you don't fix it. It becomes a lifestyle. And what happens then is you start settling down. You separate into your islands. You're no longer connected in little things. Pretty soon you're no longer connected in big things. And when love is based on our feelings, if love is what the world tells us it is, a feeling of closeness or arousal, and you've been living in isolation, guess what? You're not going to feel those feelings anymore. You won't feel those feelings anymore. Because the feelings went away because the unity went away. Little by little by little. If we can fall in love, we can fall out of love. So the alternative to that is that love is a decision and not a feeling. And I'll talk about this a little bit next time because I'm up against the time now. The good news of marriage is we reject the culture's view of it. The good news of marriage is we reject the attitudes that our culture has been teaching us. We can even reject some of the things our families of origin have taught us about it. Because God gave us the good news about marriage. And love is a decision. It's a decision to direct my will toward the good of the other, toward my spouse, completely. The perpetual desire for the good of the other. And we have that modeled to us in Christ. And we're going to talk about that next time. So that's all I have for tonight, Father.
So I'll open the floor for questions. If you have any questions related to today's presentation, if you do, I'll give you a microphone and you can ask them. And after the questions, we'll have 5 minutes break. So you can go take a restroom break if you need to, grab some water to drink. And we'll go to up in the church for adoration of the Blessed Sacrament until 8:30. And then at 8:30 will be benediction. And during the adoration, I'll be available for confessions. So are there any questions?
There's a lot, huh?
That was it.
It's too much. Like I said, we usually do it over, that would take all day. That'd be a day long. And so I know it's a lot of information I'm throwing at you. I hope it's not overwhelming.
Like I needed, but I really think that this is a terrible time to try and become married. I feel so sorry for the kids. I just can't imagine. But I appreciate you figuring out that married people need help too, because these are tough times. They really are tough times. I don't care how long you've been married.
No, you're right.
I'm sure that between the three of us, we've been married a century or two.
Yeah.
So, but it's hard.
I should be listening to you. So.
Well, you might be.
There you go. No, look, I mean, you're so right. I talking to the couples that are coming in for marriage prep, it's really hard. It's so much confusion, but they want, and we're going to talk about this when we talk about God's plan for marriage. They want a permanent, faithful, exclusive, fruitful relationship. They want that in marriage. They may not be able to articulate it, but it's what their heart's desire really is. And so we got to do our part as married couples to spread the good news. Tell them not to be afraid. John Paul II, be not afraid. In marriage too, be not afraid. Get married. Tackle this. Get into it. And I hope we are giving them the example they need. But it's tough for them.
Will you be able to address what to say to our kids when they are going through tough times and
Look, I can give you my views and what I've done, sure. But kids are going to do what they're going to do. The seed's going to fall where it will, too. And so, right? Because one thing we're going to talk about is there was a study done in California 10, 12 years ago. 98% of couples who live their faith in their marriage, and that includes being open to life, have that attitude about marriage, 98% of them stay together. It's like 2% get divorced. And so, look, there's a right way and a wrong way to do this, right? You can cross the Atlantic in a bathtub, but there is a right way to do this, one that God's going to work with you through your marriage. You're going to have forgiveness for one another, for mistakes. You're going to grow in patience, and the gifts of the Holy Spirit are going to imbue your relationship. Do you want that? Because I think you do. I think when you're standing on the altar and you're looking at one another and you're lost in one another's eyes and you're saying, I take you to be my lawfully wedded husband or wife, to have and to hold, and you repeat those vows that express, by the way, the essence of Catholic marriage. And we're going to talk about this. They express that permanence. They express the fruitfulness. They express exclusivity. They express faithfulness. It's right there in the vows. That's what you want. That's what everybody wants. And so I think if you get them to a point where you can bring them the good news about it, they're more likely to adopt it and take it and go and see. And I hope your examples are, good ones, but it is tough. There's a lot of confusing messages out there. We don't even know what men and women are anymore. How are we supposed to know what marriage is?
Is that percentage Catholic weddings?
Yes. Percentage of Catholics, who are faithful Catholics, attend Mass, and we'll talk about this too, but they don't use contraception in their marriage, for example. They live the church's teachings in their marriage. 98%, 2% get divorced.
5 of ours, one married in the Catholic Church, one divorced, married in the Catholic Church.
Yeah. Yeah, what are you going to do? What are you going to do?
Pray, St.
Yep.
Monica.
Pray.
But kind of to answer for Tom a little bit, this whole parish mission gives you the arguments. You can bring to your kids and then the other married couples all those things that they may not even know about their marriages, because they think that marriage is a feeling, that their marriage is about themselves, what is good for me, and all those things that Tom and Lenna, even though she's not present here, are debunking. So this is all giving ourselves the tools, instruments in our hands to help younger couples, especially that they may be in the beginning of their journey, maybe preparing for their journey, to know what to expect. So give them your wisdom, because already you have a wisdom of experience and years together, plus the wisdom of Tom and Lenna and what they're sharing with us. Plus, as we can always do, pray. But this is always not creating a one-size-fits-all, but it is giving this general direction, and based on that general direction, general guidance, if you will. This is where, as Tom said, majority of the couples who follow these guidelines of the church regarding the marriage, they do succeed in that marriage. But there's going to be a time for more questions in the next 2 days. Thank you, Tom, for tonight. As I said, let's take a 5 minutes break for refreshments. If you want to grab water, there's water fountain in the gathering space. If you want to go to restroom, it's time for that as well. And I'm going to the church upstairs to prepare for the adoration. And we'll begin at, let's say in 7 minutes. So that's going to be 5 minutes before 8 o'clock. And then we will conclude at 8:30. God bless.